Hi, I'm Dr. Lloyd Corder. Welcome to the first session of nonverbal communication, the video previews to each of the week's materials and topics. This week we're going to start out with defining nonverbal communication. And I'd like to show you a little diagram and ask you to think about what is being communicated in this particular picture. It might be a person, it might be a man or a woman, it might be someone dropping a handkerchief. Some people have told me that. It might be somebody hailing a cab, it might be somebody waving a little bit crazy. And so we have all of these different interpretations. And you may ask yourself, well, what exactly is being communicated in this picture? If you were to see the actual picture, what it is a picture of a man, not a woman, a man who has just thrown a softball. And if I use that at this angle, you'll see my wrist has essentially the same structure. Now, why do I start out and show you something like this? Because what we're doing is we're talking about nonverbal communication. And no matter what you thought of or all of the wrong answers, and by the way, when I ask this question, very, very few people ever guess the right answer. The closest they get is someone who's just done a basketball shot or something like that, which is a similar movement, but very, very few ever get the right answer. And the reason is because what we've done is we've taken the body language, if you will, the gestures, out of context. All you see is the shadow. If you'd seen the baseball field, the softball field, the fellow's jersey, the fact that he has a baseball mitt on his second hand and so forth, his left hand, then it would have been instantly obvious. And so why I'm bringing this up is because so often in nonverbal communication, people think there's a secret language or a hidden code or something like that, and in fact there's not. It's just a simple thing where you've got to look at not only what's being said in terms of the words and so forth, but also all of the body movements, and we don't have the context, this part in white. When we have that, it's much easier to know. So why would that be important? Because if somebody has their arms folded, let's say like this, does that mean that they're disinterested in what you're having to say? And the answer is, of course not. It might be that their hands are cold. We've got to look at the broader context to find that out. So think here for a moment. Another way I want to set this up is when people communicate, there are three different channels we might consider. There's the visual, that's what is seen, the vocal, how you say it, and the verbal, the words you actually use. So the visual, let's talk about that for a moment. If you look around your room right now, wherever you're watching this, there's a lot of things you can pay attention to. When you see somebody, you might look at the way they're dressed, what sort of room they're in, how their face looks, what color their eyes are, do they have any wrinkles on their face, on and on and on. You can look at thousands of different things. That's all things we can see with our eyes. Vocal is how you say it. Does somebody talk like Charlie Brown's teacher? Do you remember those from the cartoons? Womp, 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 womp. Wow. All boring and monotone. Or do they have some excitement in their voice? And then finally, the verbal, the actual words you use when you communicate. What's your estimate? If you take a second and either pause the video or get something in your head, what do you think they are? If we look at the expert estimate, there's a fellow by the name of Albert Moravian, one of the founders of the field of nonverbal communication. He was writing an article in a magazine called Psychology Today and had this impact. 55, 38, 7. So the visual's 55, the vocal's 30, 55, 38, and the verbal is 7. So if you take those first two categories and you add them together, 93% of your impact when you communicate is coming from something other than your words. Wow, think about that for a moment. Coming from something other than your words. So nonverbal communication is probably the most important communication you're doing. And what we're going to be focused on in the next several weeks is how to get you better and better and better at that type of communication by really taking a deep dive and practicing and doing all sorts of things on there. What that also tells us, if only 7% of our impact is coming through the verbal, when we get a chance to communicate verbally, we better nail it. We had better use words that are descriptive, that other people can see, and not have a lot of vocal noises and a lot of garbage out there. So instead, we want to be as impactful as we possibly can be. To help you set up this whole concept of nonverbal communication and where it fits within the broader context of the field of communication, I have a little communication model here that I want to spend a couple minutes on and go over with you. If these words sound a lot like the telephone, sending, feed forward, noise, feedback, that sort of thing, well, congratulations, they are part of the telephone system. I actually have the original book here. I don't know if you can see this here. It's called The Mathematical Theory of Communication by Shannon and Weaver. And this is basically the book that started the field of nonverbal communication. And if you'll look in here, for example, I don't know if you can see that, here actually is a model of what the first model of communication looked like. Now, why am I showing you this? We owe a great debt of gratitude to these two scientists, not only because they more or less founded the field of nonverbal communication and therefore body language, but more important than all that, they found an information theory. So you're watching me on a computer or your cell phone or something right now. What does that mean? It means we wouldn't have any computers. We wouldn't have any of that without the ones and the zeros. It was all information theory that these guys came up with. And they were doing that to try to improve the quality of the telephone calls when there were, a lot of landlines. We still have the problem with cell phone calls and drop signals and so forth. And what happened was some social scientists got a hold of their model and said, wait a minute, that's the same sort of thing that happens when one person or one organization talks to another. So if we can understand the pieces in the process, then perhaps we can improve that process and become even better communicators. That, in essence, was their theory. So let's take a moment and look at this model and some things that might matter in terms of communication and nonverbal communication as well. The first one is with, start on this model over to the left-hand side. There's a red little box there called You. There are two things going on there. You've got your goals and your roles. So every time you communicate, and every time somebody communicates with you, they have a goal. If I say, I'm hot, I don't think I'm talking about being physically buff, although I hit the gym almost every day for a couple hours and I try to stay in shape. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking temperature-wise. So when I say I'm hot, what do I mean? Stand up, and go over to the thermostat or air conditioner, turn that on and cool the place down. There's a goal to my communication. Somebody might see you and you're walking by and they just smile at you, or maybe it's a friend, they wave at you, whatever. What's their goal? To be recognized, to realize that you notice them. So every time you communicate or somebody communicates with you, they have a goal. There's also roles. In life, we all play roles. In this particular situation, I'm supposed to be the instructor, you're supposed to be the student. We have different roles. You're an expert at a particular topic I know nothing about. I'm going to be the student, you're going to be the teacher. Start thinking about it. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of roles that we all play in our lives. And we then, what we know about roles is if we get too far outside of those roles, there's pressure to get us back in. For example, my wife always tells me, you will not speak to me as though I'm one of your secretaries. And I say a smart answer, I don't have any secretaries. We all take our own notes. What's she really telling me? She's telling me that I need to treat her differently and I shouldn't be bossing her around. And when I start bossing her around too much, then I've gotten outside of what's acceptable and there's pressure for me to get back into what I should be doing. Once we get into or understand who we are and we're formulating a message, we come up here and we call it responding. There's two types, verbal and nonverbal, in information and relationships. The verbal and the nonverbal. Let's talk about this for a second. If somebody you know says, this is the verbal part, I love you. All right. Those are the words. What's the nonverbal part? The way in which they're saying it. What if when they said it, they said, they rolled their eyes and go, ugh, for crying out loud. And it looked like they were about to vomit. And they said, oh, for crying out loud, I love you. Do you believe their words or their actions? Is it the words or the actions? Most people believe the actions because they're more difficult to mask than the actual words. So what ends up happening is that even though they said they loved them, they don't really believe that they did. So there's a contradiction. When there's a contradiction, we believe the nonverbal always. All right, so we're going to talk a lot about verbal and nonverbal throughout the semester. The other part on this is the information relationship. If you and I were hired at the same company and we get the same pay, and you're a woman and I'm a man, and we're seated at a conference table and a bunch of customers come in and I say, hey honey, can you get up and go over there and get us some coffee? Would that fire you up? Would you be upset about that? Most women have told me yes, it would. And the reason is because they're not my waitress and that's inappropriate, and on and on and on. So what am I saying? There's information. I'm thirsty, stand up, go over there, give me a cup of coffee, bring it back over here. But there's also a comment on how we're going to treat each other. So every time you communicate, are you building somebody up or are you putting them down? And what's happening on your nonverbals, it's the same thing. Are you building someone up or are you putting them down? Are you affirming them or are you denying them? These are all of the things that are going on and on and on, and we wonder why communication is complex. Because sometimes we're not even clear on the signals we're sending, much less what we're getting back from other folks. So if we go back to our model for a moment, we've done a lot, and all we've done is thought about who ourselves were and started to put a message together. If we come over here, we come to a channel. What's a channel? There are a lot of different types of channels. It could be email, phone, instant messaging, texting. I could throw a rock at you. How about if you're the boss? Have you ever come around and watched the employees work? Do they stiff up a little bit when you come around? Especially if you're a senior executive type, you better believe they do. So even you can be the channel. Then it goes across to somebody else over here, and they start listening. And listening is an active process, and it's complex, and there's a lot going on. And good nonverbal communication can really back up and build our listening. And then it goes to the other person, and they have their own goals and roles, and they formulate a message, and this can happen in just a few seconds. I cut you off in traffic. You lay on the horn. I've learned to wave to you as opposed to give you the middle finger. Found that's a lot more productive. Or this could take a lot longer. Maybe we're going through an email chain, on and on and on. In the middle of something called noise. There's two types of noise. There's physical noise and psychological noise. Physical noise, you hear a distraction down the hall, it takes your attention off the person you're speaking with for a moment. Psychological noise is noise that is hung around from a previous interaction. Let's say the last time we got together we had words and you were really upset with me and I'm really upset with you. We may have to deal with that issue before we can go on and talk about something new or different. So there's noise. And then finally, notice that there's two kind of craters in this, and there's something called common ground right here. The closer these two craters are, the better our communication. So what do we know about common ground? We know this, that when you have great common ground with someone, communication is easier. You can take shortcuts. You know what the other person means and thinks. Think about a good friend. You got a lot of history versus somebody you're meeting for the first time. When they say something, you know what they mean. You know how they're feeling. You know what their mood is, their reactions. You've been through that before. The new person, you have no idea. You've got to work at it. It's much more difficult. So a big goal of communication is always to build common ground. All right, so that's in a nutshell what's happening in the communication process. How does nonverbal fit in there? Nonverbal is everything, influences all of this. So we've got the words, but as we're talking about all the way throughout, nonverbal is going to help us decide, are we better communicators, worse communicators, we contradicting ourselves? We've got to learn how to manage our nonverbal communication skills. All right. What are some areas that we're going to be focusing on in the next few weeks that help us delve deeper into the nonverbal? And I've listed some of them here. For example, vital signs. Do you know that your skin releases certain amounts of salt and conducts electricity? And we can tell a lot about how nervous you are, how confident you are, just based on your skin signal. So we can look at our biology, tells us a lot. We've got physical characteristics, from the way we look to the way our body shapes are, and interesting studies that communicate or suggest how we communicate based on even our body type. We've got things like makeup and cosmetic procedures, all sorts of interesting things. How we dress, the power of touch, whether it's healing or hurting or whatever. There's all touches can be a huge influencer in terms of communication. We've got whole things like body postures and movements, how you hold yourself, and the different cultures and the things that are going on there. And I've stuck a category on branding in there, which is a big area in terms of product movements and postures, if you will. How does that all fit together, and all of the things that are being communicated just based on imagery? Things like facial expressions. How do you know someone's emotions? We basically need to watch their face and other parts of their body. How about the eyes? Do you know your eyes can give you away? They tell you whether or not someone likes what you're saying, not saying, just based on the pupil size in many cases, or how we control conversations. The voice is the same way. We have our own unique voice. Sometimes it sounds strange when we first hear it, but we can use our voice and all sorts of things to be improved. And in time, social media, we're going to talk about that. And finally, space. Things like seating arrangements. Just where you're sitting can influence how effective or ineffective your particular communication is. So these are some of the very quick categories we're going to be focused on throughout this course. So really, when you get down to it, nonverbal communication is something you're doing all of the time. You cannot not communicate, period. And I wonder sometimes if even in death we're still communicating. And I'm not talking spiritually. I mean, go to a graveyard, and why do some people have darn near buildings, big mausoleums or monuments built after them? Even long after they're gone, you've got to come away with the conclusion that that person had some money or some stature or was somebody important compared to everyone else. So it's a very interesting field that you're getting ready to delve in, and we're going to have a great time working on this in the next few weeks and months. Thank you.